Hello everyone, last week I put up a video asking if you had any questions for me, and I was pleasantly surprised with the number of questions and the good quality questions, and I didn't even get any trolling comments. I was waiting for that immediately, or some ridiculous things. Didn't even get that. I was surprised. So thank you for everyone who asked me a question on YouTube and on Twitter. So now it is time to go through those questions. I just copied them all over onto some paper and printed it out real quick to go through. We have one from Twitter with Tonbo12 asks a couple questions here. What interests do you and your wife not have in common? Because we're on here all the time talking about things that we like and have in common. There are a few things, but a lot of the differences are more of we like a similar thing, but maybe different aspects of it. Let's say we're both very big readers, and we both read a lot of fantasy, but she reads a lot more, let's say, high fantasy than I do, like Firebird Press, Mercedes Lackey, that type of thing. And that's not quite as much as what I'm into. And I also read more science fiction than she does, and a lot more like hardcore science fiction, maybe some like like military science fiction, that kind of stuff. So differences within certain things, and we both enjoy similar types of video games, but I'm a little more into RPGs than she is. She's a little bit more into platformers than I am. And one area that sticks out as far as movies and TV shows and that type of thing is that she is not as into older movies and TV shows as I am. I really enjoy a lot of TV from the 50s and 60s, particularly the 60s, and I also enjoy a lot of movies from the 60s and back. I watch a lot of silent movies and stuff too, and she enjoys some of that, but not to the extent that I do. The other big thing, the last thing I can really think of off the top of my head is like physical fitness type stuff, that type of thing. I always did track and cross country and all that stuff when I was a kid. In my early 20s, I got into very heavy like weightlifting and things like that, and I still I'm fairly active, don't work out the way I used to, but I still like to go to the gym every once in a while, that kind of stuff. And that's just never been her thing. That's not her bag, baby. That's not her thing at all. She is much more sit and read a book, hang out at a museum for a day and a half kind of thing, which I also enjoy, but not to that extent. So there's one story of I took her to the gym one time, and I remember telling her dad about it after we went, and he goes, "Oh, that was a mistake," because he did the same thing once before too, because he goes to the gym fairly regularly, and yeah, that did not go well. So yeah, next question he asks is, if you had to watch the same 5 movies on a loop for the rest of your life, what would you want those 5 movies to be? And I thought this was interesting because while these are some of my favorite movies that I would pick, they're not my top 5 movies, because some of my all-time favorite movies are a little more slowly paced, they're a little more serious, a little more epic, and if I was watching the same 5 movies over and over again, I don't think I would like that. I mean, I don't think I'd want to watch Blade Runner, or let's say go the other extreme, watch Grave of the Fireflies and Schindler's List over and over again. That would just not be what I would want. So these are some of my favorite movies, but these would be the 5 that I would pick if I had to watch these over and over again. Because these are 5 that in real life I do watch over and over again and have on many formats. It'd be 2 Peter Sellers movies, 2 Pink Panther movies, A Shot in the Dark, and The Pink Panther Strikes Again. A Shot in the Dark because it's my favorite comedy ever, and The Pink Panther Strikes Again because I think that is by far the funniest of all the Pink Panther movies. Not my favorite, but I think it is the one that has the most laughs, and I can watch more times even than A Shot in the Dark. The Goonies, because I have never and will never be tired of The Goonies. My Man Godfrey, the original, obviously, William Powell one, not the later remake, and The Thin Man, the first one, with William Powell and Myrna Loy. Those would probably be my 5 that I would watch over and over again, because I'd want something that's more lighthearted, that's a comedy, that has a little bit of excitement in it and really good characters I get into over and over again. So those would be the 5 that I would pick. And the last question is, have you had any pets besides Zanza and Minx? Since we've been married, no, but we both grew up with pets. I grew up with cats mostly, and she grew up with dogs and chinchillas and birds and that kind of stuff. A house, always full of pets. Strictly Sega asks, some of your favorite pre-1960 movies, please. You looking for some more movies to add to your Laserdisc collection down under there in Australia? It's hard to think. I don't even know what to say really for that, because So many. I mean, as I said before in the other question too, I watch a lot of movies, 60s and back. Ones that will come to mind very easily would be, I did a video not that long ago with my Marilyn Monroe collection, so check that out for some ideas. Huge collection. Anything with William Powell and Myrna Loy from especially the 30s and 40s. Anything Cary Grant in that time period, going back to the 20s. There'd be so many to go through. Gloria Swanson's a good one in that time period. Ingrid Bergman, Bogey and Bacall. Again, the 20s I was talking about before. Things keep coming to my mind because there's so many. Clara Bow, anything with Clara Bow that you can find, and particularly for Laserdisc, because this is one you might want to try and find, is two that are on Laserdisc with Clara Bow are Wings and Clara Bow's It. And Wings is readily available on VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, whatever, really good quality copies. It's the first Best Picture winner, so it's a really good movie, hands down. If you can find Clara Bow's It, get that on Laserdisc. It's a great one to add to your collection, because while it is available in other formats, it's harder to find. They're not great quality. From my experience, the best way to watch that movie is the Laserdisc still, unless it gets re-released sometime in the future, which I find to be doubtful, but we can always hope someone would pick that up. But yeah, definitely check those out. So there's so many. I mean, that's like 10, 15 plus percent of our, probably over 20% really of our movie collection is 50s and back. So that's a lot. But those are some that come to mind. Joey John asks, what's your favorite flavor of Luigi? I'm assuming you mean those like Italian ice thing. I've not had those since I was a little kid. I occasionally maybe see them around here in the supermarket, not very often. I remember as a little kid having them a couple times in the summer, and I like whatever the blue one is, like a blue raspberry, whatever it is. But yeah, I probably haven't had one of those in like 25 plus years. But the blue one I think I remember liking. Slenderman's Buddy asks a couple questions here. What do you think of Frank Herbert's Dune books, and are you excited for the new movie adaptation? I really like the original Dune. I've read some of the later ones, but I have not revisited them since I was in high school. I'd love to go back and reread them, especially the first one, so I do really enjoy Dune and the universe surrounding that. I am interested, I wouldn't say excited, but I'm definitely interested in the new adaptation of Dune, because I feel like it's just never quite been done right. The 80s movie has some great visuals and some good ideas, but it just doesn't quite work. There of course have been canceled projects in the past that have kind of almost happened, and Sci-Fi Channel had that Children of Dune. I remember that miniseries, watching that when it was on TV. It was okay, but Dune has just never been done quite right. I always thought that Dune and a later thing, definitely a very different thing, but always comes to my mind, is Dragonlance original trilogy. I think those would have been perfect right after the Lord of the Rings trilogy was done. They get that level of production done, and it just hadn't happened. And maybe this will be that for Dune. I don't really know, but it looks interesting. It looks promising. And if you had to be stuck on a deserted island and could only take 3 book series with you to pass the time, which 3 would you choose? Well, for book series, I would probably pick like 3 different longer Star Trek book series and just bring a suitcase full of those. That's probably what I would stick with. And one last one here, favorite Star Wars Expanded Universe books. I would say, off the top of my head, anything by Timothy Zahn I have always been fond of. There's a whole series of them. I think I'm actually sitting in front of some of them here, but some Timothy Zahn ones. Planet of Twilight I really liked. Pretty much there's a whole string of Star Wars books from the Expanded Universe that I like that came out pretty much in the 90s. That's kind of what we both stick with. In the 90s I grew up with reading a lot of those, and listening to all of those on books on cassette, because I lived down the street from our local library, and I used to get those during the summer and listen to those all summer long. So, but yeah, Timothy Zahn's definitely always been like a go-to from that time period for me. Successful Roaster asks, which editor is used for videos? I use Sony Movie Studio Platinum 12, which is a few years old now. I don't know, maybe like 6+ years at least, I think. I always get pop-ups from Sony, buy the newest version, whatever, but Still works perfectly fine. I don't have problems with it. I'm familiar with it, so I just keep using that. I struggle to find a reason to update it. It works fine, whatever. I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, but Erized368 has a couple of questions here. Do you have a favorite character from the Final Fantasy universe? Man, pinpointing just one specific character is pretty hard for me for Final Fantasy. You can pretty much pick anyone from Final Fantasy IX, and I could say, yeah, that's my favorite today. Final Fantasy character, and then maybe one day is a Dane, one day like Dagger, Princess Garnet, one day Vivi, whatever, but just someone from Final Fantasy IX. I've noticed in the past that you own some of the Dot Hack novels. Do you like the Dot Hack franchise, and are you interested in trying the GU games, the remasters? I do like Dot Hack. I really only got into the Dot Hack sign anime when that was first airing over here, and playing a few of the older games on PS2. The remasters look good, but again, I would be much more interested in having the earlier PS2 games remastered in a compilation, the earlier 4 of them that now getting that 4th volume, you might drop a couple $100. I would be more interested in those. The GU looks cool, but I'd be more interested in those first 4. Did you or Amanda ever try Songbird Symphony, which you had suggested in an earlier video looking for indie games? No, we haven't. I know Amanda's list of indie games that she wants to try for the PS4 is a full page long, printed out, and that's one of them I think is on there. But no, we have not had a chance to try that out. Dave S. asks, what are your favorite music bands or artists? Say a top 5. My top 5 would be George Michael, ABBA, No Doubt, Franz Gall, and for 5th probably Judy Garland would be in there. Do you own many work prints of films? No, I do not. Will you look into collecting 4K films? Not really. I don't have an interest in it at all. I primarily watch DVD, Laserdisc, and VHS, and we do have a bunch of movies on Blu-ray and HD DVD, but I don't watch those as frequently, and I definitely spend more time watching TV shows as far as the number of hours I watch stuff than movies, so definitely DVD is the primary thing, and then Laserdisc, and then VHS. So I just have no interest in 4K, because really with the 4K, I would just be rebuying the same movies I already have on Blu-ray and DVD, and probably Laserdisc, maybe several different versions on Laserdisc. I mean, I just don't have an interest. I just kind of at a stopping point with Blu-ray. 4K, just don't have much of an interest in, and I'm so used to, I mostly watch stuff in standard definition anyway. So we only have one 4K disc, and I didn't even get that, specifically I wasn't looking for it. It was a movie that I wanted on a standalone Blu-ray, and I found a 4K Blu-ray, regular Blu-ray combo pack, and just grabbed that. And there's only one other 4K disc that I know will own, again, because it's in a pack with a 3D Blu-ray and a regular Blu-ray in a steelbook, and the 4K Blu-ray is just kind of an extra. So those might be the only 2 we ever own. I just don't have much of an interest. And have you ever visited Australia or have any interest to do so one day? Yeah, we would both love to go to Australia. We both would love to go to both Australia and New Zealand. We'd love to go down there, but it is just such an expense, and I mean, going the whole way down there, just even the trip is so daunting. I mean, I grew up going to Germany every other summer. I've been to Japan, and even for me, it's wow, that's a heck of a trip down there, and be such a expensive trip. So someday, yes, we would love to do that, but it's probably pretty far down the list as far as things that, or realistically, are more going to visit. But we'd love to, absolutely. What would be the rarest and most expensive VHS, DVD, or Laserdisc you own? I don't really know, because I don't really care or pay attention to that sort of thing. Sometimes I happen to realize the value of something just because I hear it talked about in different videos or see how much prices have gone up over the years, but the majority of our collections we get things like thrift stores, secondhand online, buying lots or from auctions, eBay or whatever, or I import a lot of stuff from Japan, which tends to be a lot cheaper than trying to find its North American equivalent for a lot of the type of things that I collect. So yeah, I don't know, off the top of my head too, some of the more rare things we own aren't necessarily the most expensive, because if something's really, really rare, it's not automatically expensive if there's no real demand for it. One of the rarest laserdiscs I own just comes into mind because I got it recently is the Captain Planet release, which is definitely a very rare laserdisc, and a lot of people have been collecting for 40 years and didn't know it existed. But there's no demand for it really, so it's not going to be super expensive. And the Captain Planet DVD set that we picked up was pretty expensive. I guarantee there's other stuff. Little Darlings I know is kind of getting up there on Laserdisc. There's my Ocean box set on Laserdisc from Japan. There's some of my more rare Kamen Rider stuff, whatever. There's stuff on every format that is probably up there, but I really wouldn't know off the top of my head. I just don't really pay attention to... I kind of try and get what I want for my collection. I don't really care about the value. Top 5 GameCube games would be Tales of Symphonia, Soul Calibur 2, because that's my favorite version of the 3 versions I have. I have all 3, the PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. The 2-Bat and Kaidos games, and Lost Kingdoms, which is really good. The one that would be on there if I had it would be the GameCube version of Skies of Arcadia, but I don't have that, and it's really going up in price lately. I have it on Dreamcast, but yeah, that's one that would be in that top 5 if I had it. Naffer asks, let me switch pages here. So over the past year or so, I've really gotten into the Hercules and Xena franchise for the first time, and it seems like you pretty much grew up with those shows, so I was wondering, a couple different questions related to that here. What's your favorite and least favorite season of both Hercules and Xena, and why? Hercules, my favorites would be season 1 through 3 and 5, and season 1 including the movies. That's one thing. If I'm not sure what's on streaming services, I don't really use too much of those, but on the newer Hercules DVD releases, the season 1 is actually missing the entire first half for most of the releases that I've seen, at least the ones here in North America, because the first half were made for TV movies before it went into the regular series, and that whole first half seems to be cut. So you're missing a lot there. But so 1 through 3 and 5 would be my favorites. 1 through 3 because that is classic Hercules Legendary Journeys. That is the style, the feeling, the characters, the thing that really launched a whole bunch of 90s television. You wouldn't have things like Xena, you wouldn't have Buffy, Angel, any of the spin-off stuff from Xena and Hercules, Cleopatra 25, and Jack of all trades, sort of competing things that came a little bit later, like Beastmaster. I mean, there's an endless list of TV shows from the mid-90s to the early 2000s that owe a lot of their style, and sometimes, in some cases, very existence, to Hercules The Legendary Journeys. And 1 through 3 really are those core prime seasons of Hercules The Legendary Journeys. And season 5 I like because it's something a little different. So my 2 least favorite are 4 and 6. I'll talk about them a little more in order. Season 4 is still great, but it just doesn't have quite as many classic episodes as 1 through 3. It's still really good. I still enjoy season 4, but I never go back to it as much as 1 through 3. It doesn't have quite as much of the same classic feel. And 6 is okay, but it's, half a season because of contracts and Kevin Sorbo leaving midway through because his contract was based on those movies. So his contract renewal was like partway through that season instead of the whole way through. And because he didn't renew, they were going to do a full 6th season. I think a 7th and an 8th were up for grabs on the contract. But since he didn't renew, it ended. So season 6 is cool because it's a return to a lot of the feeling and style of 1 through 3, but it's just not quite as good as those, and again, it's like half a season. And season 5 I mentioned is my other favorite, along with 1 through 3, because it takes a very different turn. There's a very dark ending with season 4 going into season 5 involving Gilgamesh. I won't get too much into it, but I really enjoyed the change of pace in that season. Is something very different and handled very well with all the stuff in Ireland and whatever. So season 5 was really cool, and I think it's a very underrated season, but 1 through 3 definitely the core of Hercules. Similar thing with Xena 2 through 4. I think are Xena, at its best. I think those are, to me, the most memorable seasons, the core of what Xena is. Fantastic. I love season one. I definitely have the most nostalgia for season one because I remember, staying up late watching the premiere and just being enamored with the whole show and falling in love with it. But I do think that it wasn't quite up to the standards of 2 through 4 because it started off where Hercules was, it's the parent show, it was the big show, and Xena was the little show, it was the secondary show. But things very quickly shifted to where Xena was the bigger show and started getting preferential treatment versus Hercules, and you could really see an uptick in quality. And there's nothing wrong with seasons 5 and 6 at all either. Just 2 through 4 are my favorites, and there's no least favorite for Xena. I mean, I love every season of Xena. I think it's just amazing. One of the best, most entertaining shows ever, and later on gets into some really great drama as well. Just fantastic show. But 2 through 4 are my favorites. Who's your favorite main recurring characters on Hercules and Xena, and least favorites? Man, there are so many characters that go on Xena and Hercules. There's so many. It's hard to even think of who would I not like really, because if I had to pick ones that I like the least that are kind of recurring characters, maybe Strife and Falafel. Those two come to my mind. But yeah, one really good one, Keith Urban does a great job in that show. He's well known now for things like Lord of the Rings and Star Trek, and he's done a whole bunch of stuff. But he was really good as, we always refer to him when we see him in a movie. Oh, there's Caesar Cupid. He's also in one of the Thor Ragnarok, things like that. But we always refer to him as Caesar Cupid. So if you get that from Xena and Hercules, as we always call him, Caesar Cupid. He's a great one. Definitely Kevin Smith, the Ares, amazing. You can't go wrong with Michael Hurst as Aeolus, Callisto, Ephany. I don't know. There's an endless list of characters that I love from those shows. Autolycus, you have to mention him. He's obviously just amazing because I'm a big Bruce Campbell fan, so really enjoy him. Salmonius is great too on both shows. And those are characters too that also, those two in particular, got their start on Hercules, but became more of a regular on Xena over time. Just great shows in general. Jack asks, what is your favorite movie and who's your favorite actor? My favorite movie of all time is Princess Mononoke, Mononoke Hitomi from Studio Ghibli. My favorite actor is Peter Sellers, followed closely by Jackie Chan. And also, I think I might have already asked you this recently, but you made a video, this is quite a few years ago now, about language learning advice. As another person who studies Japanese, I was wondering if you became fluent and if it still comes in handy for you. I've not been keeping up with studying Japanese at all. I feel really bad about it, and it's something I really want to get back into. It just became not a priority for a long period of time. Too much else going on. It's taken a real back seat. But yeah, it's still a language that I've been very interested in, and I speak a little bit. But yeah, definitely something that I've not gotten any better with over time, we'll say. I really want to get back into it. Just has not been a priority. So Sega CD Universe asks me a couple questions here. I knew you were going to ask this one. Favorite full motion video game? If I had to pick one, probably one that came to my mind when I read that was The Unsolved on the Sega Saturn. It's a Japanese-only game, but all the FMV sequences were filmed with English-speaking actors. It's a really weird thing, but it's it's another one of those detective type things, solving murders, and goes into very bizarre directions. But there's some English dialogue, and not all the text is super difficult to read if you have some basic Japanese, and there are guides online, so I was able to work my way through that one quite a few years ago, and that really stuck with me. It's very entertaining. Favorite B horror movie, Sleepaway Camp. I've always loved that one. It's just, to me, I just always have a lot of fun with it. I laugh my whole way through it, and even that thing, that creepy image at the end, I just have always enjoyed Sleepaway Camp. An old answer many, many years ago might have been the original Evil Dead, but I mean, is that still considered a B horror movie at this point? I wouldn't think so. Very, mainstream type thing. Rarest Laserdisc you own, again, maybe that Captain Planet as far as difficulty in finding, yes, but it might even be some of my Japanese discs might be technically a little more rare or whatever. Laserdisc you prefer more than its Blu-ray or DVD release? most of them. Not universally. There are, especially thinking of Captain Planet, some Image Entertainment releases which don't have great visual quality, but in general, most of the time I prefer watching something on Laserdisc to its DVD or Blu-ray counterpart, unless, again, say it's only available in pan and scan on Laserdisc, or it's just really not a great release and it got a remaster down the line, then maybe the DVD or the Blu-ray is better. But if they're all fairly comparable, if they all kind of come from the same source and not one has had like a major remaster over the others or whatever, they're all very similar releases just on those, the benefits or disadvantages of each format, I usually will go for the Laserdisc. The stuff that I tend to like the most on Laserdisc over its DVD or Blu-ray counterpart tends to be a lot of black and white stuff. I find looks fantastic on Laserdisc, and maybe some later releases I might like just the same or better on DVD or Blu-ray, but definitely a lot of animation and a lot of black and white stuff. But yeah, a majority of my favorite movies from like the 40s and back I prefer on Laserdisc. And last question, how did you meet your wife? Well, this one time I called an escort service and I asked for a short Italian woman who was really great at cooking, and she showed up at my door. No, that's not what happened at all. I met her at college in a creative writing course, and we took creative writing course together. We actually took both that one, and then there was like a level 2, so we took those creative writing courses together, and that's how we met each other. And within like half a year or so of taking those courses together, we ended up dating, and like 7 months later we were engaged, and then like a year and a half later we were married, and it's been close to a decade already that we've been married. Feels longer some days. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so that's how we met. We met at college in a creative writing course. Shadow Steve asks, I get this pretty frequently, this question, it's probably never going to happen. Will you ever do a review for Xenoblade Chronicles, breaking down the game and why it's your favorite game of all time? When I started the channel, this goes to a lot of like how the channel has changed over the years too. When I started, I really was more focused on very in-depth video game reviews, using tons of gameplay footage, and like I really, some of those reviews, some of the shorter stuff like Hot Wheels Turbo Racing on the N64, that didn't take very long to do. But some of the longer RPG reviews and some of the Shenmue stuff, like I remember they just took so much time. I remember doing my review for Shenmue 1 and 2, and then this big long video my brother was in, I think like one of the first times he was in a video about sort of the spirit of Shenmue and that type of thing. And just doing those 3 videos together was like 80, 90 hours of work over the course of a little over a month. And I just can't do stuff like that anymore. I just can't devote that much to YouTube, and it's changed over time and pulled away from those because of that. There's so much else going on that it just is not, I just can't put that much time into it. And Xenoblade Chronicles, because I love it so much and it's such a huge game and there's so much to tackle, if I actually did a Xenoblade Chronicles review, I would want to do like a real review. I'd want to do one of those old school style, like replay the entire game again and capture footage, and but I don't know if I'll ever do it, just because that would be my only video coming out for like a 3-month period if I did that. So probably never going to happen. But yeah, that's pretty much why. It's just I enjoy just kind of casually getting on camera and just talking about this other kind of stuff in smaller, shorter chunks than devoting that much time to one video. So yeah. Metroids Prime asks, favorite hobbies, activities? Do you enjoy comics and anime, and do you cosplay makeup? I definitely do not cosplay makeup. I enjoy, some comics and anime. I'm not like a super anime fan. I enjoy some. Most of the anime that I like is from late 70s through the very early 2000s. So Amanda likes anime as well. We read some manga. We don't read a whole lot of comics. We read some in the 90s and like some comic book based stuff from then, but a little more on the manga side than, let's say, like American comics, that type of thing. We do watch anime. Favorite hobbies and activity? I mean, right here. I love reading, I love writing, and I love watching and collecting movies and TV shows, playing video games, that sort of thing. That's probably what I spend most of my time doing. Really, I love that. I don't really pay attention to any sports, so that's not really a time sink. Moving on here to Grayson, the Goosebumps Kid, 1992. What is the first ever console you had? The NES. That was the first console I had, and like very soon afterwards the Genesis, because by the time I got the NES, like the Super Nintendo was already out. So I got the NES, and very soon after the Genesis, and then the PS1 was my third one there, and those were all within like a 3.5 maybe year time span, 4 years at most, that I got all those. And the review basement. When did you start really collecting formats like VHS and Laserdisc? Not including the VHS you might have kept from your childhood. So like, when did I start actually collecting stuff? So VHS, I don't think there ever really was like a starting or stopping point. Of course, we had stuff that our family had, but I would sometimes get it as gifts, or like I would. My grandparents lived, my dad's parents lived in Germany, and it was cheaper for them to send over some money for Christmas rather than buying gifts there and paying to have it shipped all the way over here. So they, did that for us every Christmas. So sometimes I would get video games, or sometimes I get some VHS. So that never really was a thing that ever kind of started and stopped. The only other thing I could consider a starting point was maybe well after VHS, purge period, like, DVD came out and I was going to college and moving around a lot. A lot of VHS kind of went away, and re-getting some of those favorites, not everything obviously, but some of those VHS tapes from the past 10 years or so that I may have gotten rid of, that I have fond memories of. You could call that a starting point. Laserdisc is something that I was always interested in. I always wanted a Laserdisc player, and I didn't get my first player and disc until, I'm trying to think exactly how many years ago. 4 years ago? 5 years ago? I think I want to say 4 years off the top of my head. Maybe it was 5. But that's it. It has not been that long, because growing up, there's no way my parents were ever going to buy a Laserdisc player. Like, there's no way. I mean, this, to give you a good idea, in my freshman year of high school, I was still using the same desktop computer that we bought when I started first grade. So, not a technology household. So Laserdisc player, forget it. And by the time I had my first summer job in high school and could have possibly saved up and afforded that kind of thing on my own, Laserdisc was pretty much out the door already. That would have been summer of like 2003 maybe when I got my first job. Well, I think it sounds about right on top of my head. So around 2003. So I wasn't walking into a store in the mall and seeing like the Laserdisc player or anything. And even to this day, we don't find Laserdisc very often. It's occasionally at thrift stores. There's one record store like half an hour away that sometimes has like 5 or 6 discs. Maybe if you go a couple times a year. Most of our Laserdiscs come from eBay, Japanese like auction sites, the Laserdisc Forever group, the Laserdisc database, that kind of stuff. So Laserdisc was something I just never could get into. But then finally got to the point where I found a handful of Laserdiscs, and I finally decided to bite the bullet. I watched a video, the first video I ever saw was Sam Hatch, and talking all about Laserdisc, and I said, you know what? I'm going to bite the bullet and finally get into this format. I've always wanted to. So I finally got my first Laserdisc player, and then my father-in-law had an old broken player he hadn't touched in years, and like a couple bins full of plastic tubs full of Laserdiscs in his basement. And so he gave me all of those, and I made a big video about that. It was like 100 and something discs or whatever. So that started me off like big, because within a period of a couple of months of me deciding I'm finally getting it into Laserdisc, I suddenly had like 200 discs on a working player. So that was great. That's when I really got into Laserdisc. And then next question here. Yes, also, how do you decide what stays in your collection, especially when you run out of space, and what leaves the collection? That's a very good question, and that doesn't happen that frequently to the point of something we already own in the collection leaving. A lot of that comes from, we do spend a lot of time, myself in particular, researching and deciding what versions are out there and what I want. So a lot of the times, if things are kicked off, they're kicked off the list before I ever buy it because I know a better version. But when that does happen, it's usually the most common thing is, let's say we have it on DVD and we find a Blu-ray DVD combo pack and there's nothing like missing, like no commentary or was lost in the transition or anything like that. It's basically the same DVD. We'll get rid of that standalone DVD and just have the combo pack. So same amount of space for a Blu-ray and a DVD as just that DVD. So that happens more frequently than anything. Sometimes with VHS, sometimes maybe I picked up a cheap VHS along the line, found it on DVD later, and maybe like a Laserdisc. Most movies I won't end up keeping on VHS unless it's something like very particular. So that happens a lot. But other than that, things don't really leave the collection that much. It's more deciding beforehand. And I always had the mentality in my mind of space, of course. Space and time are the two biggest issues. I talked about that in another video. As far as collecting, the biggest things are realistically, how much can I read, watch, and play and enjoy? Because I know I want to come back to things. That's the whole reason that we have physical collections, is I want to have control over, I want to go replay this thing, I want to watch this thing, I want to read this thing, I want to just be able to do it and not have to worry about, is it there anymore on this service or whatever. I want to have control over what I can do and do it when I want to do it. So I always keep those in mind, so a lot of times more when I find something or something new comes out or a new edition for a favorite movie, do I really want that? And I know going in, if I do decide to get that, something else has to come off the list to make a change. So it's really more on that end than the things that are already in the collection leaving. It doesn't happen very often. With video games, it's usually the same thing. One thing that left recently was the DS version of Mario 64. We have it on the N64, and then we got that Switch collection, which has the, so I have a portable version of Mario 64, didn't need that DS one. So that kind of stuff can happen. That's kind of the same concept as getting the Blu-ray DVD combo, getting rid of the standalone. That can happen sometimes. George Muscle asks, which 5 TV shows, games, music albums, movies, and books would you bring in a desert island? So if I was stuck on an island for months or maybe even years, what would I bring? Starting with TV shows, I would bring Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Voyager, the original Star Trek, and Bewitched. So that's an easy one there. Games, I would bring Xenoblade Chronicles, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Final Fantasy IX, Xenogears, and then either Xenoblade Chronicles 2 or Shenmue 3, one of those two. Music albums, I would pick George Michael's older, ABBA, The Visitors, or like a #1 hits, that kind of best of compilation, but if I wasn't going for compilations, it'd be The Visitors, No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, maybe the Xenoblade Chronicles soundtrack even, but maybe not since I'm bringing Xenoblade Chronicles, whatever. Franz Gall, I would bring Das Beste auf Deutsch. That was a compilation of a lot of her German hits, so I really like that. And movies, it would be like the same 5 from one of the first questions there about what I'd watch over and over again. And for books, I would probably pick 5 longer biographies like that I find really fascinating. There's a really good Peter Sellers one that came out not that long ago. That's probably what I would pick for books, because I feel like those, if I'm spending a long period of time stuck somewhere, I wouldn't necessarily want just one story that I make my way through and I'm finished with. Maybe I'd want something that I can read chapter here and there type thing. And what fictional universe would you like to live in? Star Trek, but probably pre-Dominion War. Favorite console from this generation? The Switch. I really like the PS4, but definitely the Switch is my favorite so far. And science fiction or fantasy? Science fiction overall. I do like fantasy. I'm going to make one change to the TV show one. Now I'm thinking of it. In place of Star Trek Voyager, I should have said MASH. It just came into my head. I would pick MASH. That would be one. So yeah. So if I missed your question, if I didn't see it, or it popped up after I started filming this video, I apologize, and hopefully if I see it, I'll go back and answer it, and if I notice that I missed it. But thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you like the answers to your questions. And thank you very much for participating, and thank you for watching my channel. I love having you guys around. And again, yeah, thanks, and hope you had a great time. See you in the next video.